bad ideas get pulverized and the truth will set you free. Trento Vision is hosted by Tom Trento. Tom can be reached at 561-319-5533 or tom@trentovision.tv. Listen and watch every weekday from 3 to 6 p.m. on AM 1470 WNN and trentovision.tv. Now, let's get a peek at Tom's view of the world. Here's Tom Trento.
What's that?
That's Sweet Home Alabama. I have to eat humble pie today to the tune of, you missed it, Kenny. It cost me $5, actually $10. I lost the bet. Rabbi, I took the Catholics over the Baptists, but Alabama kicked Notre Dame's
old-fashioned ass whooping is what it was.
Oh, man, that was horrible. That was sad. But so I bow to Nick Saban. I bow to Miss Alabama. Did you see Miss Alabama? Man. AJ, what, McCracken? What's his name? McCracken. His girlfriend is she was up in the stands, and the camera kept going to her, and Brent Musburger kept kind of fawning over, oh, look at this beautiful. His girlfriend is Miss Alabama, the real Miss Alabama, you know. So and then she got all these tweets, and she's more famous than him, than the quarterback now. But I gotta say, we were wrong. Notre Dame got destroyed.
We do have a trivia question, though.
Well, before the trivia question, for our trivia expert, you know, as goofy as the leprechaun is for Notre Dame, as goofy as the leprechaun is, what's with that elephant, man? What is that all about?
The elephant actually goes with the roll part in Roll Tide 2. In the 1920s, a Alabama sports writer described the defense as appearing to be a group of rolling elephants, and it stuck.
Okay, this is totally
What about
unnatural.
Crimson Tide? What about Crimson Tide?
Well, what's Crimson Tide all about?
Crimson is obviously the color. I do not know where Tide came from. It's been with the Alabama football team
Crimson,
for more than a century.
Did you look it up?
Yeah.
Oh, Mark looked it up.
Yeah, the Crimson Tide comes from the 1907 game against Auburn and Alabama, where it used to be called the Alabama White. What was it? But anyway,
I don't know. You better look it up.
They played the game in Alabama. The uniforms got so red from the Alabama mud. They call it the Crimson Wave, and then the Crimson Tide because of just the
red dirt,
red dirt, and the wave.
Okay, well, both of those are goofy things.
The thin white line, and it became the thin red line. Is what. But
they have a darn good football team, that's for sure. Okay, Tom Trento here on Trento Vision. That's the sports segment of our national security show, because we are football fans here. But so we did. The Catholics lost to the Baptists, essentially, though I did see some of the guys on Alabama doing the sign of the cross. But essentially the South is a Bible Belt Baptist area, and the Notre Dame are Catholics. Any Jewish football players? Are there any Jewish football players out there, or what?
I'm trying to think.
We have a couple of Jewish experts with us. You guys play football?
I did when I was a kid.
Okay. You played, we did the Canadian football stuff with you. But, yeah, I don't think there's some big names in the
No, it goes back to the 1930s. I don't know I forgot the guy's name. But
anybody know any Jewish football? Ben,
why doesn't Kenny know?
Kenny, any Jewish football players of any note out there?
Sid Luckman would be a coach of note.
Yes, that goes back a ways.
So we're going to have to say no to that.
So I know what it's from. All the Jewish mothers going, you are not, your piano fingers and your violin fingers are not getting smashed up by those big guys down the street, you know? You guys will be the owners of the team. You're not going to be smashing your heads on the thing.
I did meet the tall...
there have been a couple of recent guys that are Jewish guys.
But the really good basketball player from Israel. What was his
name?
Tal
Brody?
Tal Brody, yeah.
Yeah?
We met Tal Brody.
Oh.
We met him in Israel. He's from New Jersey, and he played, I guess, in the Olympics and everything.
Yeah.
And, he's the ambassador of goodwill for Israel right now, which means constantly partying. He goes to all the parties. Really a nice guy. So, Tal Brody. But here we are on Trento Vision, 4:11 on the East Coast in the afternoon. We have a special guest with us as we are trying to get our hands around what looks to be a potentially bad development for Israel. Now, we've made this point, and I'll continue to make this point. From a national security perspective, the future of Israel dramatically relates to impacts, effects. Oh, we're off the thing. Okay. Dramatically impact. I see a belly covering the lens, but I see. You know what? I'd rather have your belly covering the lens than the picture that's up there right now. The future of Israel, from a national security perspective, is directly related to the impact.
Yeah. Computer. How about elephant in the room?
Rolling tide in the room. We almost had another near mark miss, or near mark, we'll just call it, because the assumption is it's a miss.
It's not a near miss.
No, that was a hit.
That's a hit.
That was a step on computer hit.
Yeah.
Then my idea of bringing 6 people here tomorrow to be sort of the stands, it's probably not a good idea. In any event, whatever happens to Israel, there's a direct and corollary impact to those of us living in the United States. We are connected on a national security basis. The jihadis view Israel as the little Satan, not the big Satan. We are the big Satan. If we stop funding Israel, the jihadis are in a better position to harm Israel. So we're the number 1 target. Israel's the number 2 target strategically. Operationally, tactically, they may have to go after Israel on a piece-by-piece basis to demoralize the essence of what America is all about in protecting its neighbor in the Middle East, its only friend in the Middle East. And in the past 4 years, those of you who have had your head in the sand, there is now a ring of Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic Jihadi fire enveloping the little tiny state of Israel. We have down here Egypt now, gone. Forget about it, Muslim Brotherhood. They own Gaza. We go a little bit to the north. We got Lebanon, Hezbollah, the Shias, boop, Persian bomb, come over here. We have Syria. That's a fun place nowadays. The Brotherhood's going to wind up running that thing. Yeah, who are you going to root for there? You know, the Catholics or the Protestants?
Lose-lose.
Yeah. Coming down, we have Jordan, and King Hussein is like this all day long, biting his fingernails.
Exactly.
And folks,
and also don't forget about Saudi Arabia. That's the big prize for the Brotherhood. They want to topple the Saudis, and if you look at the map again, I mean, there's 2 countries that are just ready to go down. Next one's going. And I've been reading a lot of literature how they're coming out and attacking Saudi Arabia, how it's not this, how it's not this, how it's not compliant, and all this other stuff.
Remember Mark Langfan, the northeast oil fields of in Saudi Arabia are being viewed by the Shias, by Iran. They want those. So we can have a Shia Muslim Brotherhood, Shia Sunni, 2-front attack on Saudi Arabia, and who are they going to turn to for help?
Well, and Obama, you know, he has no love for Saudi Arabia whatsoever. He just said he wants to,
which is kind of bizarre.
But he bowed to the king.
Yeah, he bowed to the king, and he leans toward the Sunnis. I don't know, Rabbi. Can you make sense out of all of this? What do you see? First of all, welcome back. Good to have you back. How was your New Year?
Happy New Year. It was good.
Good. Is there a special Jewish blessing or anything for like a New Year?
For the New Year? Well, I guess Shechianu. Just thanking God for sustaining us.
But when's the next holiday?
Next holiday is Tu B'Shvat. It's the last Sabbath of the month, the last Shabbat.
And what is that one about?
That is the birthday of trees. Initially.
The birthday of trees.
Sounds like a Unitarian thing here.
A holiday for the birthday of trees?
There's lots of New Year's.
Yeah, there are.
Really
There are a lot of New Year's in the Jew.
Yeah.
Actually, believe it or not, Rosh Hashanah is not really the New Year in the Bible. The New Year in the Bible is before Passover in the spring. But liturgically, the calendar begins. And so birthday for trees was initially
It does sound like a Unitarian.
to decide when first fruits would be emerging to be brought to the temple. And the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago. And the holiday was still observed, but it was a minor holiday.
But what about the first temple? This wasn't in effect for the first temple?
No.
Okay.
Well, it was because you had to bring certain crops for there were animals and crops.
586, I think.
586 BC was the first destruction by the Babylonians. 70 CE, 70 AD was.
The Babylonians are who today?
Iraqis and...
Who they are today? Well, all I can tell you is that Babylonia encompassed the Tigris and Euphrates.
So the Iraqis, basically, probably.
It's hard to tell because there were so many migrations.
Right.
There were so many migrations all over the Middle East that.
Well, I do have one question.
Where's
for
the
you.
Garden of Eden?
That should be Tigris and Euphrates.
There are 4 rivers mentioned in Genesis, but 2 of the rivers we can't identify. We can identify Tigris and Euphrates, but not the other 2 rivers. So we don't know.
So nobody really knows.
Nobody really knows.
Somewhere over there.
Somewhere over there.
But I do have an important question for the rabbi. How many
It's Rabbi Question Day, 888-565-1470. That's actually a good segment.
How many holidays are there in Judaism? Because, I mean, it's like every other week you guys are celebrating something.
Well, there's usually there's one a month. There's 1 month, Cheshvan, that has no holidays. It's called Mar Cheshvan, the bitter Cheshvan, because there are no holidays. There are some months you have fast days, but there are a lot of holidays. And the reason this holiday is important today is, well, the temple was destroyed, so the whole issue of when the new crop was coming was not an issue for Jews because there was no temple to bring the crops. Okay. But in modern Zionism, they revived the holiday as a holiday of the greening of the land. Of planting trees, draining the swamps. And, despite, there were Arabs who were there before the Zionist movement got there. There were Jews as well, but the land really needed to be built up, and that's what the Jews did. That's what the Zionists did. And Tu B'Shvat, which really was sort of a minor holiday dealing with the sacrificial cult, became a major holiday because it represented the Zionist project in the land of Israel, to green the land, to make it productive, to make it fertile. Yeah. So...
I like that holiday. So what do you do? I mean, you plant trees or something?
Plant trees.
Do you really?
Yeah, when I was in school, we raised a lot of money to plant trees. And
Jewish National Fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we also imported a lot of fruit from Israel.
Yeah.
And so we ate a lot of Israeli products.
Pretty cool.
During
I didn't know about that holiday.
There actually is a Seder for Tu B'Shvat, like there is for Passover, but it's not practiced by most Jews. But it emerged 500 years ago in Safed, in Sfat, in the Galilee, among the mystics who were Sephardic. They were exiles from Spain and Portugal, and they created a Seder using the different fruits of the land of Israel to commemorate the holiday.
Okay, so you have a holiday that goes back to 586.
Earlier, probably earlier.
Probably earlier,
yeah.
but we know the temple was there then, and the Babylonians came down, took the Jews as slaves, and Nebuchadnezzar and all those guys were floating around. Then we go 500, 600 years later, and the second temple's destroyed by the Romans. Common Era of 70.
Yeah.
70. Okay, so that diaspora or diaspora, however people pronounce it, how many Jews were in Israel or in Jerusalem in 70 A.D.?
Well, we have one source, and that's Josephus.
Excuse me one second.
Yeah.
We haven't prepared this. This is all on the fly, so you may not know. Something's going on in my mind. But the rabbi comes in, and we have great conversations. We're gonna talk about national security stuff, but I have some interesting questions I have for you. And if you want to get in on the conversation, 888-565-1470. Ask your rabbi day. Do you have any idea of the population?
Well, Josephus says that, there were 1 million casualties, but the numbers are inflated. But there was a significant population in Jerusalem when it was besieged by the Romans. I don't know how many, but it could have been hundreds of thousands.
Several hundreds.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, everybody's got
not millions.
Basically, everybody's got to get out of Dodge. I'm sure some stayed. But where did everybody go? And how did they get there?
First of all, even before the destruction of the Second Temple, you had major diasporas communities in Alexandria. There were 250,000 Jews in Alexandria at the time the temple was destroyed. They eventually rose up against the Romans about 30 years later and were put down, and the great synagogue of Alexandria was destroyed by the Romans. You had Babylonia, because only 20% of the Jews who were exiled, their descendants, only 20% came back.
That's right. Yeah.
So you had in what is current-day Iraq, Tigris, Euphrates, you had a significant Jewish population that became the dominant Jewish population in terms of Jewish law and scholarship, and even politically.
The Babylonian Talmud, right?
Yeah, the Babylonian Talmud is the standard Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud is inferior because it doesn't cover as much ground, and the situation in Israel, I won't call it Palestine, but in the land of Israel deteriorated because of the removal of the patriarch, who was the Nasi, who was a descendant of King David, who was the leader of the community. That position was taken away in the 4th century AD, CE. Economic depression in the land of Israel. Babylonia was thriving.
What about Persia?
Persia, again, you had a community that had been exiled already in 586, so many hundreds of years earlier. So you did have a community in Persia. But again, the Persians controlled Babylonia, the Zoroastrians. So, saying what is Iraq and what is Iran, it kind of melded. It was all controlled by different groups of Persians, whether Achaemenid or Sasanian, depending on what period.
And it's important for the audience to understand, the viewers and the listeners, no Islam at this point. We're in the 1st century, basically.
Yeah.
And, Islam doesn't come until the 7th century. All right, so diaspora happens. Jews take off, some stay there. Year 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. Those 500 years before Islam goes and conquers Jerusalem. What's going on in Jerusalem, Israel?
Initially, the Romans tried to convert it into a pagan city. There was a rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132 to 135
Is that when they put
AD.
up the statue of Jupiter?
Yeah. I want to put you a statue of Jupiter in the town, the temple ruins.
And Jews said, no, not a good idea.
Well,
we don't want that.
there are different views. We don't have Josephus to tell us because he was dead by then, but he told us about the first revolt. Then there was the diaspora revolt in between. In 115 to 117, the Jews in the diaspora rose up against the Romans, and we know it was a very bloody revolt. It was put down very harshly because the Talmud, which doesn't talk much about it, but the rabbinic writings say the Mediterranean was turned red with the blood of the rebels in the diaspora in 115 to 117 under the Emperor Trajan. Under Hadrian, this is about 20 years later, there may have been 2 reasons. One, that they wanted to turn Jerusalem into a stronghold of paganism. The other, there's another historian, Pseudo-Spartanius, who says that Hadrian was Hellenized, believed in the beauty of the body, and saw circumcision as being a defilement of the body and a desecration of the beauty of the body. He outlawed circumcision. Therefore, the Jews rose up.
So there's still Jews throughout the 1st century, 2nd century.
Even afterwards, up through the Islamic period, there are Jews in Israel. they're not living mostly in Jerusalem. They're living in the Galilee, in Tiberias, especially Tiberia. Tiberias is a major stronghold of rabbinic Judaism in Israel in the 4th, 5th century. They're even discovering now, they just discovered in the Galilee a synagogue that dates back to the 4th century. And on the floor, there's a mosaic. All these synagogues had mosaics on the floor. And one of the, it's interesting, one of the stories on the mosaic is about Samson. There are a number of that celebrate Samson and his, which is unique.
Well, what's interesting is because this is basically the time of the Roman Empire, what you're talking about. Yeah. And the Roman Empire had actually an interesting strategy of how to conquer lands. They said, well, you can go in there, we conquer lands, and you can believe in whatever religion you want to. However, you must put our religion the supreme. Now, most of the lands agreed with that, except, then it's a big problem with Judaism because, no, we don't have any gods. We just have the one. But most people around the areas actually took that and said, oh, okay, we can, as long as we keep praying to our mother goddess figures, we can keep praying to that. Yeah, but you still have to, if someone asks you, you have to believe in Jupiter and all the other ones.
All the Caesars and everything.
So you could practice whatever you wanted to, but you just had to officially say it. Yeah. And in Judaism, that was a big problem.
That didn't work,
yeah. Although after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the Romans returned to be fairly favorable, but it's a myth that Jews were not there in Israel in the Islamic period. They were,
and so Palestine was there too.
Oh,
the country of Palestine was there, thriving and everything.
Judea had been devastated. Judah and Judea had been devastated and had been depopulated from Jewish population. But in the Galilee, there was a thriving community through the Islamic period. Of course, the Jews of Babylonia were dominant. There was an argument in 922, centuries after the calendar was already formulated, between the rabbis of Babylonia and the rabbis of Israel about when the first day of Passover was. I think the rabbis in Israel said it was on Sunday. The rabbis in Babylonia said it was Tuesday. So it was a big issue because whoever makes that decision controls world Jewry, which I guess is the old world then. But it was a major point of contention because the rabbis in Israel said, well, we're in Israel. This is the promised land. The rabbis in Babylonia said, but we're in Babylonia, and the Babylonian Jewish community is an illustrious community. So,
how was it resolved?
I don't know. I think the rabbis of Babylonia won.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did.
And the one problem with the Roman Empire, it was more that it was about power and control, is like you're saying with the Babylonian, and that's what it was. Is one of the main problems that the Roman Empire had with Judaism was because they would not submit to the Roman rule or control, and that was so. It was just, I'm not going to admit to that Jupiter is a god or whatever, and that's became the major contention. Well, if you're not going to do it, that's when Hadrian came down and says, well, if you're not going to listen to me, accept Jupiter as our god, we're going to come down and crush you.
Yeah.
And that's the reason he did it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, history here. Last week we did all kinds of history on American history, and drew some interesting principles out of it. Well, today we're dealing with Israel, with national security issues, and it's good for the audience to see that when the Second Temple was now, why was the Second Temple destroyed?
Second Temple was destroyed because the Jews rose up in rebellion
against the Romans.
Yeah. Now, the one thing to remember is that one of those who surrendered to the Romans when he saw Jerusalem being besieged was one of the first rabbis. His name was Yochanan ben Zakkai, the son of Zakkai. And the zealots, the rebels, they held till the end, till the place was burned down.
Is that where the word zealot comes from?
Yeah, well, it's, I don't know. But it's very interesting because from then on, actually, some rabbis did support Bar Kokhba 60 years later. But because of the failure of the rebellions, what happened was...
What was the rebellion for?
The rebellion was... the Roman governors were just lousy. They had no sensitivity to Jewish religion, to the needs of the Jewish population. And eventually the people got fed up.
Okay. Like I was talking about earlier.
And... they stopped bringing sacrifices, not to the emperor, but in honor of the emperor. Once that stopped, the Romans realized this was serious. And what's important about this, I think, is that these two rebellions failing, and the rebellion of the diaspora failing, made the rabbis have cold feet about political activism and about messianism. Yep. So the tragedy is, not so much a tragedy, but obviously this system worked for a long time because there was no opportunity to settle in Israel because these empires controlled it, whether the Romans or the Ottomans or the Byzantines. So the idea of let's wait for the Messiah sounds very good because there's no opportunity to go to Israel, and you don't want to alienate the people giving you a charter or the dhimmi status. But of course, by the 20th century, this strategy fails terribly. And Jews use the same strategy with the Nazis that they used earlier with Muslims and Christians and pagans, not realizing that the strategy of the Nazis and their goal was to destroy all of them, and there was no room for negotiation. So there's a lot of talk about whether Jews collaborated during the Holocaust with the Nazis, but the fact is that for 1,800 years, the strategy of negotiation, the strategy of
appeasement.
Appeasement has a very negative connotation, but actually it benefited many of these communities.
Sure,
they lasted a long time.
For survival.
And they survived, and they thrived, actually. But, by the time... by the time of Nazi genocide,
you could thrive in a benevolent totalitarian context. It's totalitarian. This is the boss. It's monarchical as the boss, but it could be benevolent. You can't do all this crazy stuff, but you can live your own life and you can have your own business and all that. So, why rock the boat? If that's the situation. But once the regime becomes malevolent, not benevolent, but bad, and wants to kill you, then the modality of existing, which was the negotiation and all of that, somebody's got to say, this ain't going to work for those guys. So it's so critically important to adjust your negotiating modality based upon the view that the boss has toward you.
Yeah.
And that's how national security issues should be negotiated. I think Netanyahu gets that, but I don't know if Dershowitz does.
One of the interesting things also during that period he's talking about was the Romans also had a goddess who was their worship called Cybele, or different ways to pronounce it, but Cybele is it written. And she had the solar disk in her hand. And solar disk was, a rock that was delivered from outer space onto the ground. It was housed in the Seven Hills in Rome, where the Vatican is. And that was supposed to be the sacred rock of the goddess worshiper, of the mother goddess. And she held it in her hand. And one of them was the animal sacrifices. Well, after Rome fell in 425.
425.
Yeah. But those idols and those worships all disappeared. Then all of a sudden they reappeared in Islam with the cube and the other rocks that were now all of a sudden being venerated and worshipped again.
Nothing new under the sun.
And so it became a borrowed, because all those lights came down into they didn't just go away. They were snuck out of the countries where they were for protection. And then they ended up in Arab lands, and you see all those little idol worship that Muhammad went in there apparently crushed. And that's the reason they created the cube with the solar disk, or the rock in the Mecca.
Yeah, that's the Cabal over there. Yeah.
Well, the question for me would be, if we already know the Jewish history, and certainly for many Jewish people, they don't know the Jewish history going back 2,000 years or 3,000 years or more, but certainly they know the history of the 20th century. Okay, they know the history of Nazi Germany, they know the history of the Soviet Union, they know what the Russian Revolution was about, because frankly, most of them or their parents or grandparents came to the United States because of those events, if nothing else. So, what does it take in a post-revolutionary and Holocaust world for these same Jewish people and their descendants to recognize when a totalitarian regime or faith is bent on the destruction of the Jewish people, and when it can be coexisted with and when it cannot be compromised. And why is there an inability of the Jewish people to recognize the difference in the modern context?
You know, I'll try to answer CJ. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. I think the issue with Islam and jihadist Islam in the Jewish community is that there is animus against Christianity for the persecutions and exiles like 1492 in Spain. But you study history and you realize, first of all, I know we've discussed here the dhimmi status, this fourth-class sort of status of institutional inferiority. Then you have examples of massacres, of forced conversion in the Islamic world. And then all you hear from Jews is, oh, it was a golden age. And Jews and Muslims and Christians worked together in Spain, and it was a wonderful, and they, instead of looking at history through the lens of history and the academic study of history and the facts, they put a modern imprint on it, and all the, again, just it's a big problem. It's a big problem because you look at the history and then you realize that when you have 600 rabbis writing to Israel and say, don't build around Jerusalem because this is going to infuriate the Arabs of the Palestinians or Palestinian Arabs. Right. These people are just not taking into consideration history. And the fact is, yes, there was persecution in terms of Christianity, and there were exiles. And in a sense, in some ways, not all, but in some ways, it did culminate in the Shoah and the Holocaust. But not to examine anti-Semitism in the Islamic world, not to examine the massacres, the forced conversions. The greatest Jewish thinker, Maimonides, was forced to leave Cordoba after 8 generations because of forced conversion to Islam by the Almohades, and he had to flee to Egypt to a more tolerant Fatimid regime. These things are ignored. They're part of the historical record. And then, in addition, looking at the modern history and looking at a figure like the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, and you look at the Islamic embrace of Hitler and fascism, and you see that not only, it's not the dhimmi status anymore. This is not about a third-class citizenship. This is about destruction. This is about genocide.
The third, either convert, submit, or die. This is the die part.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. We have the modern public statements of the leaders, political and religious, in Iran, in Egypt, all over the world. They say very openly every single Friday, our goal is to exterminate the world of Jews. And they don't really make a distinction between Zionists who want to be a political power in the state of Israel and people who are Jewish. Okay? They want to exterminate all the Jews wherever they are, everywhere in the world. End of story. Why are we not able, modern Jewish people in the West, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, for those few who happen to be remaining there, to accept these statements at their face value? Period. If somebody says, I'm going to kill you, I want to kill you, and you've seen it or know of it in your own lifetime, when somebody said it and set out to do it, how do you not take that seriously?
It is denial. It is really being in a state of denial. And it's like Jews who are living in the interwar period between World War I and World War II in Germany saying, how could this be happening? You know, we have been loyal Germans. 10,000 Jews died fighting for Germany in the First World War. They couldn't believe it was happening, so they were in a state of denial. In other words, they just couldn't believe it. And I think many Jews play into the narrative that everything evil in the world was caused by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males who dominated everybody, who were colonialists and imperialists, and the Jews, who I don't know what empire they represented, were part of this this suppression of people of color, and therefore people of color in the Arab world, in the world of Africa and Asia, can do no wrong because it's the original sin. Really, it's a religious category. It's theological, I think.
It's
the religious sin of colonialism. Now, I'm not going to say colonialism was good or benefited the populations that lived there, but you know what? Colonialism ended in most of the world about 50 years ago.
Right.
You can't continue to go on this track where everything is a responsibility. Everything that happens in the Arab and Islamic world, especially in the Middle East, is the direct responsibility of the British, the French, or whomever, or the Zionist movement. Come on, take responsibility for yourself. Look at your own actions and what you've done. And Bernard Lewis, who's the foremost scholar of Islam, who's not a Muslim, who happens to be Jewish, he wrote a book, said, what went wrong? He said the Islamic world should be asking, well, 500 years ago we were a major superpower, the Ottomans in terms of the Middle East and parts of Europe. What has happened in the past 500 years? And the question is, stop looking externally. Stop looking outside for enemies who brought you down. You did it to yourself. And Jews tend to, not all Jews, but there's some Jews play into this narrative that, God forbid, we criticize the Islamic world. God forbid we criticize dictatorship in Africa or decimation of Christians in the Sudan because it doesn't fit the narrative of the evil, white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant male who's responsible for all the ills of the world.
Exactly. And they're more
well
afraid
said.
of being labeled as racists, bigots, or extremists than they are of being exterminated.
Yeah, I know.
Why?
And it goes back to also this mindset. Even before World War II, before the world really knew which they should have known already, should really know what people are capable of as far as exterminating Jews for their belief, is there was a wide anti-Semitic sentiment, not only in Germany, which everybody today thinks that's the only place it was at. There was actually a wide anti-Semitic tendency in America, coming from Henry Ford, coming from Lindberghs, and everybody. I mean, this was, and people were willing to turn a blind eye to what was going on over in Germany, and also in the Middle East. It's obvious there was a anti-Semitic bias. So I mean, it was a worldwide, but people just kept denying it. Once again, people kept denying this all the way up until it was too late.
But how do you break through that?
That was my question. How do you break through that?
Well, you learn from history. That's really
But people
important.
aren't. That's the problem.
I agree, Mark. It is a problem. I mean,
They won't listen to what the reality of what the history is. They won't. They won't go to synagogues where the rabbi is going to tell them actually what's in the parsha this week and what does it mean historically and what does it mean for us. They go where they hear like all kinds of babbledy nonsense.
It's like Hitler was the only person who was anti-Semitic back then. Hitler was the only person who was anti-Semitic, and that's it. No, I'm sorry. There were the Muslim SS troops, lots of them.
Yeah.
Lots of them that wiped out all of Bosnia.
If you went to a synagogue now in Boca Raton where the rabbi was a rabbi for Obama and sent a letter to the Prime Minister of Israel and said, don't build apartments for Jewish people on Jewish land, what do you think you're going to hear in Shul that Saturday?
Well, I'll tell you, CJ, I know of a friend of mine in Georgia who went to a synagogue, conservative synagogue, and the rabbi on Yom Kippur talked about the redistribution of wealth. That was his message for Yom Kippur. Now, I want to keep politics out of the synagogue. I want it to be a place where everyone feels comfortable. I'll always speak up for Israel because I don't consider it a political issue alone. There's obviously religious things that resonate and personal
Plus, there's 6 million Jewish
and
people living there that
yeah.
we ought to care about.
Exactly.
No matter what.
But you know, when it comes down, and then you know, when you have these graduates of JTS, the main conservative seminary, who are taking these kind of pulpits and using them not to enhance spiritual life, not to enhance knowledge of the texts, which are the foundations of Judaism, but they use the pulpit as a bully pulpit, basically. It's like academia.
In other words, what they did was they took God out of the religious service. They took the whole point of being there out of the service and replaced it with an ideology instead.
CJ,
is what they did. And so the people who are going there, they probably think to themselves, I'm being a good Jew, I'm going to services, etc., etc. They're getting indoctrinated with something else, not with Judaism, so therefore they don't have the wisdom to fall back on to correctly interpret what is happening in the world. And I think that's a huge
you know, when you go to synagogue and the rabbi says it's about social justice and the prophets are about redistribution of wealth, and the prophets are about how, well, I don't think they would say this, but because I think probably the prophets believed that the private sector created jobs. I don't know. I wasn't there. They don't talk about it. But, you know, when prophecy, when Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel are reduced to social action. And I have nothing against social activism, you know, like Abraham Joshua Heschel, the great conservative rabbi who marched with Martin Luther King in Selma. It was wonderful. But Heschel has been reduced to a caricature of a man who fought for social justice and ethics alone. Right. This was a man steeped in God, in theology. In fact, one of his great books is called God in Search of Man. Yeah. And prophecy is mostly about idolatry and about how what we do in our lives, we make idols that aren't God. And we substitute God with whatever it is, with money, with
slavery.
Well, yeah, it's a form of so to reduce it to social justice and say, well, the basis of modern Judaism is that Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Isaiah would have been perfect consultants and assistants
to the Peace Corps
to
or
FDR.
something. Yeah. Oh, to FDR.
To
okay.
FDR, like Stephen Wise, who was a great American Reform rabbi, not great in some ways, great in other ways, but it's interesting how the past is used to serve ideology.
And now God has been, government has replaced God in a lot of these people. Where now the messiahs come from government. They do not come from, religious texts. Am I correct?
That's something for you to bring up at this conference that you're going to in Orlando, because what I'm talking about that's happening in the synagogues, this is what's happening in the churches, and that's why this church in California feels perfectly at home with an MPAC conference right in its sanctuary.
What's MPAC?
MPAC,
Muslim Public Affairs Council.
Okay.
Muslim Brotherhood front group.
I've been to several churches with Christian friends of mine who have invited me to go to services with them, and then have Sunday dinner after, et cetera, And I've been to their services, and they're huge churches, some of them, and there's nothing about Jesus, and there's nothing about God, and there's nothing about what do I learn from the Bible from your perspective while I'm sitting here in the pews. I have no idea what to take away from the services that I've attended at all. And so therefore I have to assume that the people who attend them, unless they're Bible reading every day, are pretty clueless about what Christianity means to them.
Yeah, and a good way of setting up a comparison is the evangelical movement. The evangelicals are fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists. They believe in the 4 or 5 key fundamentals of the faith. That would be similar to the observant movement, the Orthodox movement on the Jewish side. So those who are really committed to a personal God and to living all this out and believing the scriptures, those are the evangelicals. On the Jewish side, Christian side. On the Christian side, the places you went to, the liberal Episcopalians or whatever, what was one of the places?
One of them was Baptist.
Yeah, it could be a Baptist church. Yeah.
I've been to a Presbyterian church.
It could be. There's a whole bunch of denominations, but the key is whether it's an evangelical Baptist church or whether it's a liberal Baptist church. If it's on the liberal side, many of those people don't even believe in God anymore. That place, that Episcopalian church in where was it in California? Pomona? No, Southern California. They don't even, they've long ago stopped believing in God. It's all social work, social action, all of that. And that's in all the faiths. I mean, that's going on. Now, what I'm hearing, Rabbi, we're going to have to hold you over. Can you stay over for the next time?
Oh, good.
What I'm hearing a lot after the 6th, and not that this was new information, November 6th, but it was it took on more importance. What I'm going to say, within the evangelical movement for 30 years, as long as I've been running around doing this, there's been a call for a return to repentance, to the political. And I'm a political activist. I'm a Christian activist, political activist all my life. But that has to be, the foundation for that has to be a solid belief and reliance upon a living God each breathing moment of your life. And it's very easy to get away from that and do the politics without having the foundation of, am I moving in the direction God wants me to move in? After the 6th, many leaders in the evangelical community and even many sub-leaders, they don't have high-profile positions, but pastors of smaller churches are saying, we need national repentance. We as a people need to fall on our knees. And following the model of Isaiah and Joshua, of the major prophets, even the minor prophets, where they were telling Israel, you've forsaken me, you're going after idols, I'm going to smash you down unless you straighten out. What are your thoughts on that? Why don't you hold that? Because we gotta leave right now. I want to hear your thoughts on the call to repentance in the Jewish community, and whether, as we hear a lot, there's maybe 15, 16 million Jews in the world, we hear that the majority of Jews don't have a true valid faith in God, even a belief in God. Many of them are atheists. And how does that all weigh into all of this? And what can we do as a people, and not get into all the nonsensical interfaith baloney that Islam is dealing with. My view of interfaith is, let's figure out where we disagree, okay? Not where we agree. Let's figure out where we disagree. Then we'll figure out, by looking at those issues, how much we can agree on, all right? For instance, if we did that with Islam, I'd go, okay, we agree on nothing, okay? There's nothing we agree on.
No common ground?
There's no common ground. There's common ground in the sake that we're standing on common ground. But every single theological doctrine of Islam is completely different than Christianity. There's nothing the same. Zero. Unless you want to just do weasel words and say, oh, God and love are all the same thing. But if you look at the doctrinal elements of these words, there's no common ground. Doesn't mean we kill each other. Just we recognize that you've got a belief system that and ours, they clash. Sorry. So guess what? I'm not living in your world. You want to live in mine, you have to adjust to America, in terms of other principles. And that's why the separation of state and church is so good. But that doesn't happen in Islam. They're not allowed to do that. So we're going to ask you that. Then we're going to get into Mr. Chuck Hagel, who is a former senator that looks like he's going to be the Secretary of Defense. He ain't liking Israel that much unless, as Alan Dershowitz is hoping and praying. Does Alan Dershowitz pray? I don't know.
No.
I had a debate with him once, 25 years ago.
When you get to God, it's a conversation starter.
It's a different conversation
Which he
with him.
has said.
In this place, we can talk about God as much as we want to, but we'll have to do it in just a few minutes.
Okay.